everyone, and welcome to this medieval history lesson. Today I'm going to talk about the role of the king. And I want to be very clear that most of what I am describing for you and explaining in these lessons is history that took place between 900 and 1400 AD. Before this time, there were kings and there were castles and there was a social system, but it was very different and it was very complex. It was not an easy type of system, and it's very hard to explain. So I am trying to describe a situation that is much more easily understood. So again, understand that between 476 AD and 900 AD, there were many different approaches to how kings operated and how life was organized. And I will talk about that, but I want you to kind of reverse your understanding. And I think this is the best way to do it. So, in this time period of about 900 through 1400, kings were not what we call absolute rulers or absolute powerful. Kings were limited in what they could do and how much they could do. And it's very important to understand this because the king had responsibilities to the nobles. So we talked about the nobles being the class underneath the king class. Now, how was the king limited? Well, actually, the king began to become limited, number one, because he took wealth from other people. He took wealth from the nobles, the knights, and the serfs. So the king was dependent on the people below him. He received food and other material possessions from them. He was generally the most powerful man with a military and the ability to exert force. So basically, he was like a general who was able to conquer a lot of territory and then could organize the people below him. But during the later portion of history, the nobles began to be unhappy, especially between this time, so about 1100 to 1200, kings began to go to war far more often. And what they would have to do is they actually had to get loans for fighting. That's right. You know, loans are very much in the news today because of our economic situation and the coronavirus. And we think how unusual it might be. But remember, the king, the man who ran the government, actually in the medieval period, would have to gather money from the nobles, from the knights, and sometimes even the peasants to go to war. He had to pay his soldiers in coin money. And in order to do so, and also feed them and clothe them, so the only thing that he did not do was equip them. They equipped themselves. So because he had to get loans and he was actually required to pay that money back to the person who gave him the money, people began to debate with him and actually said, if we give you this money, we want to have more participation in the government and in your decisions. Now, some early kings, like a king named King John of England, who ruled England from about 1190 through 1216 AD, so very short reign, complained about this, and he resisted having these men tell him what to do. And what happened is that the nobles raised their armies and began to fight against the king. So the king had a few nobles who were with him, and there were other nobles who were against him, and they fought. King John lost that war, and he had to make an agreement with the nobles to share power. So this was a very big change, and this change every few years was made stronger, to the point that by about 1400, many kings were desperately, and queens were desperately dependent and needy on the nobility. Queen Isabella of Spain in the later 1400s actually had to sell royal jewelry in order, she had to go to the bank and sell her jewelry or to a private merchant so she could get money in order to go to war and repay a war loan that was owed to one entire city. So this was definitely a kingship that was very limited. These changes led to what we understand as democracy, parliament. The nobles, the houses of the nobles, began to meet together and began to debate issues on whether the king could raise taxes. Understand, kids, death and taxes are the two things that you will always face and everyone has faced in life. From ancient times until today, we have all been taxed by our governments. Some more than others, but we all pay taxes. The king would want to raise taxes so he could go to war, he could build new buildings, or he could undertake social programs or help different peoples. But this had to be approved. Eventually, this would lead to many kings and queens actually losing so much power that the parliament became the true power in the country, and the king served as what we call in English as a figurehead. He really had no power at all. So being a king may have been a great thing, but it was certainly not guaranteed. It was not absolute, and in some cases was not for life. Sometimes kings would be replaced, some by men who wanted to be king. Other times, parliaments wanted to replace the king because they felt that he was doing too much. So I hope that this helps you understand that the nature of the kings changed very strongly, very sharply, within this period of time. Now, before this time, things were obviously different. And as I said, I will be covering that in later lessons so you understand how things were changing much better. Thank you and have a good day.